Hey y'all, Bladed here. Just want to catch on something that's bothered me for some time, and that's these myths about car modding myths. So yeah, myths of myths, go figure that one out. By the way, this isn't a hate video. If anything, it's a very positive video because I'm going to defend some of the stuff that y'all are already buying. The first thing we're going to talk about is a lot of people like to say something like, cold air intakes don't make a noticeable difference. Each time I make any video that includes a performance mod, usually I include the cold air intake. So before you think this is a video where I just repeat things I've talked about before, the twist on this is that people say that this is actually a fake performance mod. A surprising amount of people say this. They're not confusing them with hot ram air intakes either. They straight up say the word cold air intake, and I'll tell you their logic. And their logic is, look, even if it is proven to make 1 or 2% power, that is stupid and it's really negligible because you're never gonna feel it, therefore it's pointless. Now, this is true in the sense that if you want like an instant dopamine kick and a super big huge difference that blows you away, yes, you're not going to feel it. This, however, from a multiplicative or additive sense, is actually something you should still look into. Usually 1 to 2% is scientifically categorized as being within the noise, which means that the difference is so minimal, it can usually be chalked up to some other factor. That's assuming that you actually took the effort to time yourself in the first place. If you just drove around casually, then you really would never notice the 1% gain. However, that doesn't make it useless. So if you did another mod that adds another 1 to 2%, and then another mod that adds another 1 to 2%, and then a tune that then brings out the 5% of all the mods you've done that gave the 1 to 2%, and now you're up to 10 to 15% more horsepower. Now that is where you're going to feel the difference. That's the point of modifying. It's not instant gratification. Just because one mod you've done hasn't made your car soar to the moon doesn't mean that the concept of modding, or that particular mod, in this case the cold air intake, is now useless or a fake performance mod. So I'm sick of people calling cold air intakes a fake performance mod. Because yes, I know tons of YouTubers will make videos saying stuff like, oh, like it's like, you know, 5 to 6 horsepower in a 400 horsepower car that's like 1 to 2%. And again, while that's true, when you start to stack all of the modifications together, the whole it barely makes a difference mod category, funnily enough, starts to actually make a difference. The other reason you should get cold air intakes still is because hot whoosh whoosh intake noises are funny, so even if you don't plan on doing any of these mods later down the line, it's still a really nice sound. The second biggest car modding myth I'm completely tired of hearing is that exhaust systems are pointless. So this myth basically also exists word for word verbatim as to why the cold air intake one does. However, it does have a alternative reason for existence. So the alternative reason is, unlike the cold air intake one, a lot of people like to mention a substitute. They always go, hey man, you should just straight pipe cars instead because it's cheaper. And sure, it is cheaper, but here on this channel we've talked about how in the past it can actually cause some power loss in certain vehicles. Again, it's negligible. Usually a 1% loss probably. So in the same way an exhaust system might only gain 1 to 2% and deleting / straight piping may only lose 1 to 2%, what's the harm there, right? You're not going to notice a difference either way. Well, again, this comes back to the future of the build and the end game goal. In the same way a cold air intake really doesn't come into its own unless you have a forced induction or a lot of really strong power mods like cams, forged internals, high compression pistons, etc. An exhaust system also really won't make a huge benefit unless it has something to scale off of. You shouldn't try to look at exhaust or cold air intake as literal horsepower additives. Even if companies or video games try to advertise them as such, the reality is that they benefit a lot more from a percentage standpoint because it matters more what they're paired with and what other mods they're added with. So I guess in that sense, that's why people think of them too literally from adding, because whatever, we're not going to go over that. But point is, like, look, most intakes and exhausts usually tell you the horsepower gain they make on the stock car. Sometimes companies will also give a percentage. Now most people ignore the percentage because it's just really unimpressive, but the horsepower gain is easier to relate to, especially since it's usually given in relation to the stock version of the car, making it more relatable to consumers, since not everyone modifies their car the same. Forced induction or major engine upgrades can actually change the scaling of most of the simple mods, because at the end of the day, they could be choked or bottlenecked by those restrictions. There's a reason a catback system on a Z06 can garner 15 horsepower and cold air intakes can get even 44 horsepower, some companies even 50, because on a supercharged car or most forced induction vehicles, so turbocharged cars as well, if you don't give it a good intake or exhaust, it is actually being choked out. So 44 horsepower on a 650 horsepower bone stock car is a 6.7% gain. Now that's a lot more impressive and absolutely something you can actually feel. It is no longer within the noise, as even if you don't calculate this, you will feel that the car is straight up faster. So again, reminder, catbacks and cold air intakes scale a lot harder based on the current mods you already have, which is why you should still do them anyways. Also, another reason people don't want to straight pipe and still get an exhaust system is because they don't want to blow out everyone's eardrums or their own eardrums. Because in my particular case, I take my cars on road trips all the time. I'm not about to drone my brains out with a straight pipe, but at the same time, not about to bore myself to death with a quiet stock exhaust. So going for a performance exhaust is the perfect compromise. Richer tone, more noise than stock, more airflow, and better power thanks to crossovers and not just being obnoxious. This is probably going to be one of the most confusing ones to talk about this video, but 100% we gotta talk about this. We have to talk about this. People like to say that canned tunes are fake or that email tunes and ECU flashes are pointless. This is a huge myth, a stupid misconception. Having any tune certainly is better than having no tune, especially on any kind of modified car in any shape or form. Email tunes aren't nearly as good as dyno tunes, and in my honest opinion, I don't advise them for forced induction vehicles making north of 700 horsepower, but it is a great affordable start for basically any other vehicle. Because at the end of the day, not having a check engine light, or even worse, actual engine problems that could possibly arise from not using a tune is a far worse decision. As much as I'd like to make fun of instant gratification culture here, it's not always within your control. Shipping delays, part shortages, if your build is on back order and let's say you only have 2 of the 5 parts that arrived with the other ones that are 3 months out, you're not going to patiently twiddle your thumbs and wait for the other 3 unknown ETA before you finally get your dyno tune. Realistically, a lot of people want to install car mods as they get them, and you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. In this particular instance, I think that's fine because it's a great way to learn about your car. It's a fantastic step into intermediate car culture, and again, I mean, come on, whoosh whoosh intake sounds. So some of these mods, whether it's a cold air intake or intake manifolds or headers or exhaust systems, they need tunes, especially in the case of headers, manifolds, intake, or exhaust otherwise. Like, you can kind of use a header without a tune, but it's not advisable to do it long term, even if you don't get a pesky check engine light. Honestly, in some cases, your car will begin to run too lean or too rich, especially if you start installing things like intake manifolds and headers at the same time on a car that doesn't have a tune, and you need to correct these. This is an actual maintenance concern. Okay, you know, who am I kidding? God knows what motivates 90% of car enthusiasts. It is still power. So you know what? Power, sick power gains still matter here, because while a lot of people say email tunes only make 10 to 15 horsepower, again, this is a generic number people throw out, usually again based off of a bone stock vehicle. If you already have the 4 aforementioned mods, like a cold air intake, an intake manifold, an exhaust system, and a header, a tune is not just going to give you 15 horsepower. It can honestly top off 30 if not 40 horsepower, because it's basically streamlining all of those modifications and improving their compatibility. The other elephant in the room is, well, they're cheap, $150 to $400. I don't blame people for doing these at all, because if you think about it, a true dyno tune costs upwards of $800 to $1,200, but those aren't until you really need to start dialing in your end game build, and that, especially like that word endgame, really matters in this particular scenario. It's a lot easier to have these newer enthusiasts just email someone, runs that car with whatever mod configurations you told them to, then they email you back a tune. It's not going to be perfectly optimized to your car, even if they have the same model of car, because things like mileage, wear and tear, and other things will be slightly different between your cars. Minor differences like that can obviously be corrected by you physically bringing your exact car to the dyno and having a tune specifically made for it, but then again, we already talked about the money. However, the other huge main advantage of an email tune is that they usually offer free revisions. Most usually offer up to 3 or so. Some just give you a time frame like, hey, free revisions for the next 6 months. This is super nice, especially again, if you're waiting on some of your mods to arrive. Like, you have 5 mods that you purchased and only 2 of the 5 arrived. You don't know when the other 3 are gonna arrive, but by the next 6 months, they should all be here. So each time a new mod mod comes, you don't need to spend cash, get your car back on the dyno. You can just get a free revision, just like, hey, put the cold air intake on, get a tune. Hey, you got their headers arrive, boom, get another tune. Hey, you got your intake manifold, email that guy, he'll get you another updated tune. And that's super convenient. The internet is fantastic. It's completely changed the way that we've spread information in regards to everything. And here in the car community, it has completely made accessibility and ease of repetition in terms of modding and the whole tuning culture around it a lot cheaper to work with and just more sensible for someone who's in the starter enthusiast phase, who's going through mods very, very quickly. Because again, it is much harder to just get a dyno tune on the fly. Some shops are booked out 1 or 2 months, so on top of you waiting for all of your mods to arrive at once and then doing a dyno tune, you could be 7 months if not 8 months out from the point that all your mods arrive and you can finally get the dyno tune done. And it also requires your physical presence and an actual machine and an actual shop space that has overhead costs associated with it, so that's why they're charging you the $800 to $1,200, and they charge you that each visit. They usually do not give you free revisions unless even if you're super good friends with them. So to give you an example, at LS Experts here in Atlanta, my Z06 was, I think it was $1,000 the first time, then it comes $800 and then down to $600, and then they never go below a certain point. So eventually the revisions do get cheaper if you're a returning customer, but they still need your money, right? They're still running your car in the dyno at the end of the day. You can't blame them for that. And that is a huge difference between just emailing some dude online about it. So don't you ever let anyone tell you that email tunes are stupid or that canned tunes are pointless. Because when it comes to a modded car, any tune is better than no tune. It is always safer for your vehicle's health, and it makes better use of the power gained from your various mods. It's okay to wait to dyno when you finally get forced induction or when you finally get a cam upgrade, but it doesn't make sense for someone who's constantly upgrading every 2 months. If email tuning still sounds complicated and ridiculous, believe it or not, I've made a video a long time ago that still is really relevant and still walks you through the process on how to do it, and it basically works for every American car. I think it even works for, like, you know, the general concept of it still works for Subarus, but just replace every time I say SCTX4 with Cobb or something like that, because really the only thing that changes is the name of the tuner device. Like my FXDR uses a DynoJet Power Vision, but it was basically the exact same process. You just go online, you get an email back and blah blah blah. It's super easy, very fast, and extremely affordable. Do note, however, before we move on, that eBay performance chips that are like $20 are still a scam. I've got a whole video about that as well, fake versus real mods, so never confuse performance chips with an ECU flash. Those are entirely different things. The reason I'm still clarifying this here is because there are people who call canned tunes and performance chips the same thing, which no, that's not at all how this works. Speaking of my other videos though, I've made another fantastic video of, well, really everything in general, because the algae of rhythm has banished me to the shadow realm and no longer suggests anything to you guys. I appreciate the comments I get from people saying, Bladed, I've missed you. Where have your uploads been, man? Bro, where you been, man? Welcome back though. And I appreciate the enthusiasm, really, but I've been here this entire time. I haven't gone anywhere, you know. Please watch my videos. And if you aren't already, please subscribe as well. If you love automotive content, I'll be here. I'll always be here. Anyways, the final mod I want to talk about in this video is carbon fiber. Okay, so this one might have a point, but also the theme of this video is to look at the endgame build. The final goal, you usually want to save as many pounds or kilograms as possible on your car. I guess the main thing I'm tired of hearing is when people say, that money could have been better spent on power mods, therefore carbon fiber mods are fake mods. Just because the money can be better spent elsewhere doesn't make it a fake mod. Varying on your car, of course, because those values may differ, but regardless, upwards of $3,000 is a lot to spend on what effectively is a cosmetic mod in some people's eyes. Yeah, okay. Well, I guess if you're adding something that wasn't there, like putting a giant carbon fiber wing on a car that never had a wing to begin with, you are actually adding weight. Before you call that rice, let's take a look at what these people are building their cars for. Not everyone is trying to build a power-hungry machine, a straight-line demon. Some people just want a corner slayer and autocross racer. And in this regard, weight reduction and aero matters more than power in some cases. Of course, the giant elephant in the room is that, yeah, people will buy these for cosmetics and cosmetics alone. But hey, it's not even bad from that standpoint. It's still weight reduction. Yes, I know it's like, 7, 10, 15 pounds depending on what model of car it is, but if they decided that 1500 was worth it to spend on a carbon part first, so be it. Because the thing is, they still might get performance parts later anyways. Just let them do what they want to do in their own order. It's not a fake performance mod just because you can't see the instant gain from it. For some beginners, the stress of dealing with tunes and part compatibility scares them from wanting to mess with their car's performance right away. That's understandable. It's much easier for beginners to just install a cosmetic mod, and to be honest, it's most people's gateway into turning their first wrench on their car. And if that's the confidence you need to build, then mod away. Carbon hood or otherwise, no one says you have to start it all the same. Anyways, that's all I've got here. Definitely make sure to subscribe and check out my other videos if you haven't. Please, I need the views. I really want to buy Fiona in Tower Fantasy when she comes out, so help a brother out and give me some sweet, sweet views. Thanks for watching and see y'all next time. Blade Angel out.